Welcome. I'm Anna. I am the executive head of grief programs at Kaplan International, and I'm also the founder of the Student Grief Network. I'm also a human being that has had a lot of personal experience of loss, which has really brought me to this work. So I lost my brother when I was 10 years old, and then I lost my dad in my final year at university. And since then, I've also lost one of my close uncles and a good friend. So I'm very well versed in grief and loss, and I'm very comfortable talking about it. But I'm aware that it's not always comfortable for everyone. So please do feel free to keep your camera off if you prefer. Feel free to take a moment out if you need to. But you're also welcome to stay here and share any thoughts and feelings that are coming up. So the Student Grief Network is an organisation working to soften the impact of loss in universities across the UK and also more widely now across the world. We provide consultancy services, training, and we run workshops and events. And we also create lots of free resources that are available to students and staff online. And the most recent resource that we've created is the Higher Education Bereavement Framework, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But before I go into this, I wanted to introduce Hannah and hand over to her to tell you a little bit more about her work. Hannah's part of the VUB University in Brussels, which is a compassionate university, and this session is taking place as part of their Compassionate Week. So, Hannah, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Anna. So I start maybe with presenting myself. So I'm Hannah. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels in Belgium. And for my research, I'm mostly focused on serious illness, death, bereavement, and caregiving in higher education, as well as workplaces. And as you know or don't know, this event is also part of a Compassionate Week. This is our promotion material we use. And it already started on Monday. And it's a yearly event we try now to organize as part of our project or our ambition to become a compassionate university. So university in 2019 decided to work more on these topics as illness, death, bereavement, and caregiving, and make these more visible, more discussable, but also provide support from different services. And we now have Anna May that could also present during this week. We are very lucky with that. But I also wanted to share some pictures of events that already happened this week. For example, have a stands at the university with ribbons where people can write a name on it and put in a remembrance tree. You see also a picture on the upper where people are writing a card, a compassionate card, and that is posted by the university so you can support someone. And on the right, the more purple pictures are pictures of the Voices of Compassion. And it's an event for students and staff where they can come on stage, bring a poetry, bring a text, bring a piece of music, but all related to these topics, this bereavement, loss. So it's organized by students and staff for students and staff. And today, after this event, we have our yearly moment of comfort, which is a yearly remembrance moment where we actually think of students and staff who passed away, but we are also in caregiving roles or need some more support. And we end at a compassionate cafe. You see the picture, the upper picture in the right corner, where we come together, and that's just space to talk about these topics, but also about these feelings, what we experience during the Compassionate Week. All these events are supported by the Compassionate Community Center of Expertise, which is a interdisciplinary research group that combines 11 different research groups from 5 different faculties, and which all work on these topics related to serious illness, death, bereavement, and caregiving.
Thank you for having me as part of your Compassionate Week. I think it's a really good example of a university that is addressing matters around death and loss and grief holistically. And just looking at the pictures that you've shared, you can see that it's not just hosting a creative event, or it's not just hosting a space for people to talk. It's trying to do lots of different things, which will support people that have different interests, that want to come at this from different angles. And great to see so many different departments involved as well. This is not just the responsibility of the wellbeing teams. Before I move on to sharing the framework, I wanted to share where all of this information that I'm presenting to you is coming from, because it's not just me, although a lot of the work of the Student Grief Network has stemmed from my experiences of loss. I'm very aware that I am, I have a certain personality, I come from a certain cultural background, I have grown up with a certain family dynamic. There are all these things that have meant that I've experienced grief in a certain way. And actually, it's been really, really important throughout the 7 years that I've been developing this work to also listen to the voices of many other people and look at research that's been done. The framework isn't an academic piece of research, but it does draw on a lot of academia within that. A few examples that shape our work. This is examples of research that we've drawn on. There's also a lot of psychological and grief theory that we've drawn on over the years. You can also see here a number of the students that have shaped our work through sharing feedback on the resources that we have, through interviews that I've done with them, through supporting us to run groups. And this is just a small handful of the students I've spoken to, some of which has been in a more formal way, interviewing them and recording that. And a lot of it has just been kind of in passing. You can see these quotes as well, which are all taken from our community blog. So this is what the framework looks like. And I'm going to just talk you through step by step why I've put it together in that way, how you can use it. Hopefully you can take some practical advice from that to implement straight away. The framework consists of an introduction and our vision statement, a section on context. So why is this important? Who does this matter to? Why should we be taking notice of grief and bereavement in a university setting? Then the framework itself has 5 core themes. And within each of these, there are recommendations and links out to other useful resources that might support you to implement those recommendations. I've also included examples of good practice, so you can see what this might actually look like, and some thinking around what your next steps might be. And I really want this to be for both if you're on a wellbeing advisor in a university and you're kind of working with people day to day, or if you're in, say, a more senior role and you're thinking about strategy as a whole. There is something for both of you. I wanted to say that the framework is not built to fix this issue, and that is not something we can really do. Grief is complex, it's nuanced, it affects everyone differently. Everyone needs something slightly different. So there's no one size fits all solution. But what I do want this framework to be is a resource that you can use to reflect on how things are in your university. So thinking about where your gaps might be, thinking about what you do really well, and then thinking about practical steps that you can take to engage with grief in a way that is compassionate, holistic, and informed. The framework is both proactive and reactive. So it's designed to build a general culture of care around grief and bereavement, but it's also designed to help you think about what you do if a student or staff member dies within your university community. It takes into account employees, so staff wellbeing, and how we can support bereaved staff as well as students, because I think often the kind of stuff that's coming out around wellbeing in universities is very student focused. And, I started this off to think about student bereavement. But what I've noticed over my years of working is that we really can't do that without also thinking about staff. It's a really exciting opportunity, I think, to start working on this, because universities are places of innovation. It's places often where, change that needs to happen more widely in society can be piloted. And we can start to have a ripple effect, not just in the higher education space. I wanted to say thank you at this point as well to everyone. I know there are a few people on this call, but more widely, people that have supported with the development of this framework. I've shown many draft versions to people, had lots of feedback. And yeah, although I've kind of been the one putting it together, it really is many, many people's voices. So, our vision is a higher education sector that is equipped with the knowledge and tools to support students and staff through bereavement and grief, from general awareness and education to compassionate policies and support options. And we're not expecting universities to do all of those things all at once, but that's the bigger picture that we are looking at. So, context. Why is this important? Firstly, the number of bereaved students and staff. Often we think of grief as being something which is, people often talk about my work as being niche. And I always say it's not really niche. Grief is something that impacts us all at some point. And actually, research suggests that at least 10% of students will have experienced a significant loss by the time they finish university. So if you've got 10,000 students at your university, that's 1,000 students. That's not an insignificant number. A report by Sue Ryder also suggested that 24% of the UK workforce are likely to have been bereaved in the last year. So when you think about the number of staff that you have in your institution, that's almost a quarter of them. So why does this matter? Why does it matter if 10% of students are bereaved? Grief is not just an emotional experience. It's not just feeling sad. It can be complex. It can intersect with other parts of your life. So here we've just summarized that. Bereaved individuals face increased risk to their health and well-being, but also potential setbacks in academic performance, employment prospects, and even their ability to remain in education or work. And there is research coming out over the last few years sharing that bereavement is one of those reasons that people might drop out of university, for example. It might also be a reason for staff to be taking sick leave. So, this is really impacting someone's ability to function day to day. I've made a note here as well about students being a particularly vulnerable group due to factors. They're away from home for the first time. Often students, although obviously we get mature students as well, but the bulk of students are navigating that transition from being a teenager to being an adult and trying to figure out who they are, what's important to them, where they want to go moving forward. And that comes with a lot of uncertainty, which can be heightened by experience and loss during that time. There's also a lot of social pressure, and there's a normalization of unhealthy coping strategies. So, for example, a lot of students are exposed to alcohol and drugs. And for some people, this might be, a normal part of experimenting. But for someone that is grieving and maybe using this as a way of coping or numbing their feelings, it's quite hard to find that line of when do we step in and see this as something that needs extra support. And lack of current support. So, like I said, lots of universities are doing great things, and I really don't want this session or this framework to become something that starts pointing the finger at people. There is a lack of resources across the higher education sector at the moment. It's a really difficult time financially. So I'm kind of aware of all of these limits. This isn't something that is anyone's individual fault, but it's maybe not being done very well. It's just that grief is a really difficult topic. Like, it's been called by a lot of people as like the last taboo in our society. It's not just the sector that is struggling with this, it's more widely. There's also a section at the end which kind of touches on what research we've pulled this from, because I haven't just made this up from nowhere. So there are some quotes here on the right that I won't read out now because of time, but please do go back and look at these. But here I've just listed basically simply why is this important? And I'm thinking particularly about, this is almost like a business case for this, and it feels weird to sometimes put it in business terms because it's such a human topic and it's so delicate and sensitive. But actually, universities do also need to be thinking about these things. So, universities' duty of care, supporting the well-being and safety of students and staff. We can also think about suicide prevention and postvention. There has been research sharing that people are bereaved, and especially those that have been bereaved by suicide, are at higher risk of suicidal ideation themselves. Academic and employment outcomes, student experience and satisfaction, attendance and retention, And then related financial risks and reputational risks and where you might stand in your rankings, which feels, like I said, a little bit weird to be talking about in such a around such an emotional topic, but there really is a ripple effect of kind of doing this well or not so well. Here there are two quotes from two lovely people that I have worked with in the past, basically just trying to humanize this because we can talk about the research, but how does it actually feel? So Folly, for example, has shared that after her mum died when she was 16, she felt a suffocating grief. From that point, grief coloured every aspect of her life, and she was severely depressed throughout her first year of university. Mercedes, on the other hand, who works as a professional in higher education, has shared about, the feelings of emptiness, feeling sick, exhaustion to the point of being able to function. So the framework itself, like I said, this is split into 5 themes, and I'll go through each of these now. I've kind of already said this, but just to reiterate, the goal of this is to complement existing initiatives. So, for example, here in the UK, we have the University Mental Health Charter by Student Minds, which I know a lot of universities are signed up for. I don't want people to be here thinking, oh, not another framework, because I'm aware there is a lot out there. This framework is here designed to complement other frameworks. It's drawing on aspects of those and actually here to give you practical tools and guidance to not just tackle grief and bereavement, but think about the broader mental health agenda. So the first theme is policy. The idea here is around providing clear, accessible, and compassionate bereavement policies that recognise diverse experiences of grief. We want to make sure that these processes are easy to navigate, flexible, and emotionally sensitive. And you can see I'm not going to read out every single one, but please do come back to this document. You can see, for example, that one of the points I've shared is around avoiding assumptions about which loss is significant. So I know in a lot of policies, there'll be some sort of chart or something that says, for a close family member, in bracket, parent, child, spouse, sibling, you get this number of days off. There might be no mention of, so for example, when my uncle died, I was really close with my uncle and he didn't have any children of his own. And I spent quite a lot of time going back and forth while he was ill to care for him. And uncle was not mentioned in the bereavement policy where I was working at the time. So it's really important to consider how it might not always fall into a typical family relationship. Some people, their friends are more family. They might be estranged from their family. They might have chosen family. Someone's grandparent might have brought them up. There's a point on policies being inclusive and equitable, so recognising different traditions. For example, people from different cultural backgrounds might need to have days off at certain times. We might think, like I've grown up with quite a traditional, like white British background. The people that I've lost have had a funeral that takes place on one day a few weeks after the loss. That's not always the case. So again, it's about not having assumptions around that. You might also have to consider, for example, financial challenges that someone might be experiencing, caring responsibilities. These might all demand extra flexibility and support. I'm going to move on. I could go through every single one of these, but you can do that in your own time. I'm just going to give you an example from each section. So the second theme is awareness and training. So this is really about normalising the conversation around grief and equipping students and staff with the knowledge and confidence to compassionately manage both your own losses, but also responding to the grief of others. This really isn't about making everyone an expert. We have lots of staff coming through our training that, they have a lot of these skills already. It's just about normalising the conversation, making people more comfortable with it, giving people, simple guidance. Some people will need, more clinical support. Some people will have more complex needs. And in that case, it's not the job of everyone to be that support. It might be about signposting them to the right service. But what we can do by providing training, for example, by having self-access resources on our website, by sharing videos about helping other people understand grief and tips for offering support. These are all things that can just build a culture where it's not down to one person. I've had many students come to me that have gone to, on the one hand, they might have gone to, say, a lecturer and told them about what's happened. And that lecturer has kind of frozen or said, oh, sorry, that's happened. But it's like, in other words, it's not really my issue. And I think of this as leading to a downward spiral of support. That lecturer didn't need to be an expert, but if they could have just said, like, I'm really sorry, like, how are you feeling? Or do you want to talk about it? And maybe have a few ideas in mind of things that might help, that can lead to an upward spiral of that person then thinks, oh, it's okay to talk about, I can reach out for support. People might not have perfect answers, but at least it's something that I want to engage in. You've listed here at the bottom some helpful resources. So we have a staff training program, which you're welcome to get in touch if you have questions about. We also have a number of free resources online. So, for example, there's a Supporting a Friend Through Grief video webpage. We've also got a student grief toolkit, which you can actually link on your own website if you would like. I've put it together. I've thought really hard about keeping it as almost as simple as possible, because you don't want to give someone a 10-page document, but it includes artwork, it includes quotes from students, and it includes links to where people can go for support. You might also want to have a think about the competency framework by Advanced HE, which basically talks about how we can help all student-facing staff to actively be part of student support. So it's not just wellbeing teams, it's actually anyone that's working with students to start building some of these skills. The third theme is support services. So how can we ensure that all students and staff have timely access to a range, and I think range is really important there, of grief-informed support services that are tailored to meet diverse needs and delivered with sensitivity and care. So this might be just about considering what you already have in place and just checking that bereavement is one of those challenges that people can go to. So, for example, you might already have a brilliant counselling service set up. Are you just maybe you need a little bit of extra support for those counsellors? Maybe you already have peer support groups set up. Maybe you just need a bit of training for them around the issues of grief and bereavement. This isn't about reinventing the wheel. It's just about considering grief as part of this bigger picture. Like I said, that word range, having a range of support options is really important. And I actually saw a brilliant something on the Instagram of Suicide & Co, which is a charity here in the UK. They showed a picture of a menu where they had starters, mains, desserts, all for support options. In the starters, they had listening to a podcast, talking to a friend, going for a walk. In the mains, they had one-to-one counselling, going to a support group, raising money for a charity that is close to your heart, all of these things. And it shows that there really is no one right solution for everyone. And actually, generally, we need a bit of lots of different things. It's also important to know you don't have to do this all yourself. You can signpost to external services, but it's just knowing which ones to signpost to. And you can see, I've linked at the bottom, that our support for students page on our website lists useful signposting ideas. You can also check out, we have a guide for setting up a support group. So lots and lots of students and staff as well actually have shared that basically they just want to talk to someone that gets it. They want to feel part of a community. But setting up a peer support group can be a bit daunting. So we've written out recommendations, we've written out tips, we've written out things that you should consider in doing this. Again, making sure services are inclusive and equitable. So making sure that people feel represented. If all of your services, and I'm saying this, I'm aware that I'm a middle-class white woman, but that's where a lot of mental health and wellbeing and grief support falls. If that's all people are seeing, and you might have a student that doesn't feel like that's for them, how can we change this? I've also written a note here about chaplaincies, because I know that a lot of universities use their chaplaincy when it comes to grief and bereavement support. And I have worked with some absolutely fantastic chaplains. So this is not to say to stop doing that, but just considering how people see that option, because it might be open to anyone, regardless of what faith or having no faith, but people might have a perception that it is faith based. So just even if it's something to do with the wording of how you promote it. So the fourth theme is around responding to student and staff death. And I would really recommend the Responding to a Suicide Guide by Universities UK, which it goes into a lot of stuff in a lot more detail. And although it's around suicide specifically, there's a lot of stuff which is relevant to all forms of death. So here we might be thinking about, do you have a crisis response team, set up? Hopefully this won't be something that you have to deal with, but it's better to have these things thought about in advance rather than scrambling something together. Within this, what I'm really interested in is how we can prioritize emotional support. So often universities, it's a really difficult situation to deal with. So there's a lot of thinking about how you communicate to the police, or, the press might be involved. There's a lot of kind of having to tackle these things. Making sure that emotional support is really thought about within that bigger picture. So in the immediate aftermath of the death, but also in the weeks and months and even years going forward from this. You might also want to consider additional training and support needs. So, for example, if someone does die by suicide, do you want to consider like the wellbeing teams, whether they have any training in supporting people that are bereaved by suicide? The final theme in the framework is communication. Essentially, what I'm thinking about here is that there's no point having all of these things in place if, one, people don't know about them, but two, people don't want to engage with them because the communication is like, a tiny line on the bottom of a website and it doesn't look particularly appealing, or it's not very visible. So how can you communicate clearly, efficiently, but also sensitively, thoughtfully, and engagingly? One thing I wanted to raise attention to here, because it comes up in conversations I have with students all the time, which is the frustration of having to tell their story again and again, because they've gone to one department or staff member and it's not somehow being communicated to other people. So then if someone else gets in touch with them and says, why aren't you here? Or, someone's asked for the death certificate and then someone else asked for it a week later. I know there are issues around like GDPR and consent and information sharing, but just considering how you can make sure that communication is joined up to prevent people from feeling like they're having to say the same thing again and again. Here, I've just shared an example, basically, I've made up at university to think about what could it look like. So, for example, a university that is informed, compassionate, and holistic might have a page on your website sharing helpful information about grief. You might have training for pastoral teams, and you might also have a shorter webinar, say during Grief Awareness Week, for all staff to take part in. You might have a workshop series for bereaved students. You might have a peer-led bereavement group for colleagues. You might have a team that is established in case a student or staff member dies, and you might have a policy written out for that. And you might have a relationship with a local charity who you can work with and you can signpost into. This should also help. So 2 examples of universities that I've spoken to that are doing great things. One is Dublin Business School. So I spoke to their head of student experience about how they responded to the death of a student. And the second example I've included here is the University of Bath. They have a wonderful peer support group that's been running for several years now. You can also see that I've included the work here of VUB, which Hannah shared about a little bit earlier in the presentation, but you can read more here and you can see that link out if you want to find out more. So next steps, if you're sat here thinking about how can we implement this, I've put together some suggestions, which is about coordinating like a working group, evaluating what you currently do well and not so well, creating an action plan. I've said to start with the first year, probably, and just to start with a few tangible things rather than trying to do it all. and then making sure that you reflect and continue. I also want to acknowledge that, every institution is different, and I don't want you to be put off by thinking that you have to have some big plan in place. We want it to feel achievable. We don't want it to be scary. So if you're just thinking about one thing that you can take away from this, if you don't have capacity to think about tackling this as a whole, thank you. That's totally fine. We have the ideal of looking at all 5 themes with all of those recommendations. But actually, if you just take one of them and, for example, have a conversation with your manager about organising some training, or speak to HR about adding a line in the policy about, being more flexible with the relationships within a family. If that's all that happens from this, then my job is, somewhat done. So thank you in advance if you do take on even just the smallest thing from this. And you can see towards the end of this, if you want to find out more about the Student Grief Network, our details are on here. And you can see the final 2 slides. I've just included some of the research so you can find out a little bit more about where we've got this from. I haven't included it all because there are hundreds of studies, honestly, that I've read over the years, but I've just tried to concisely kind of summarize some of the key pointers from that. So that's the framework. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I'm going to stop recording this now and give a chance for people to ask questions and reflect and share this